As someone who has a keen interest in both gaming and psychology, for today's video I decided to marry these two concepts together and explore morality in gaming with a focus on you, the viewer. I'd like to discuss how games reveal and shape our moral identity. Can they serve as places to practice empathy and ethical decision-making, or are they a corrupting force? I'll be exploring some games while also bringing a few studies and a mass shooting to the table. However, I felt the need to begin with a sizable disclaimer. The contents of this video are speculative. I present some relevant studies, but much of it is meant to spark a conversation and to elicit some thought on the subject. Not everyone will agree. We all approach games differently. You may find that none or all of it is relevant to you. Even still, I'm deeply grateful that you've joined me on this video, and I hope you enjoy. Growing up playing games, my friends and I would often hear the same rhetoric about how gaming was this corrupting force that led people to horrific acts. Parents, teachers, the media, they all echoed the same exact sentiment, that games taught people the dark arts of ultraviolence. In 1999, Eric Harris and Dylan Klebold perpetrated one of the most infamous school shootings in history, when they shot and killed 14 people and injured 23 at Columbine High School in Colorado. The Columbine shooters famously loved doom and quake, a fact that at the time the media latched onto and used to explain why two high schoolers committed such a heinous act. Parents of some of the victims even tried unsuccessfully to sue the video game companies involved in the creation of the games the two shooters enjoyed so much. It didn't help at all that at the time the two had allegedly made a doom map based on the school, and one of the shooters went on to write, "I must not be sidetracked by my feelings of sympathy, so I'll force myself to believe that everyone is just another monster from Doom." It's difficult to talk about a topic this dark. It's chilling thinking about the profound effect that the actions of these two individuals had on not just their victims, but the families of the victims who I'm sure to this day feel that loss profoundly. Given what all of us have been told about games and hearing about events like Columbine, even if it was before my time, it sometimes gave me pause as well. Could my favorite pastime, my escape from the stresses of my day-to-day life, truly be warping my mind slowly but surely into something more sinister? Was I destined to slowly lose myself to the violence I committed on screen? To become cold and uncaring enough to callously murder without a second thought? Well, given that I haven't succumbed to bloodlust just yet, I think it's fair to say that those concerns of mine were likely unfounded. It should come as no surprise that media can and does influence people. It's a big part of why censorship even exists. Media in almost any form can communicate ideas to the person consuming it. It provides us with scenarios, real or imagined, and in some cases, challenges us to ponder the implications of what is being conveyed. I remember in college, some of the classes I took had us debate philosophy. Some had us watch informative videos, while others saw us reading books. My friends and I actually spent many nights drinking, hanging out, and discussing some of the ways in which things we've been learning have shaped our beliefs. If we are to believe that media we consumed had made us think and even change, it stands to reason that games themselves hold within them that same potential. I realize that not everyone's going to agree with that premise, if only because games themselves are typically tools of entertainment, something we partake in to have fun. Having played the vast depth and breadth of games over the years, I can't say I agree that they are net neutral when it comes to their influence on us. Researchers tend to agree as well, many of whom have over the years tried to figure out the underpinnings of in what ways games can change us. So for our first game, let's take a look at one game that tries to be more than just entertainment. A game that simultaneously also tries to send a message about war, about survival. I am of course talking about This War of Mine, a game that received much attention at the time for presenting us with the type of narrative we don't often see in gaming. Despite coming out a while ago at this point, the world at the moment sees much more active conflict than it did when it first came out, making it topically relevant for us to look at. While most games had you go in guns blazing as an active combatant, or perhaps as a commander overseeing troops, This War of Mine had you play as neither. You were simply a ragtag group of survivors in the middle of a war-torn city whose only goal was making it through each day. You had to concern yourself with limited resources that didn't respawn. Your survivors could get sick, cold, injured. You had to make sure that there were enough beds for everyone, and most importantly, everyone had to be fed. If it wasn't apparent, this game focused heavily on resource management. Almost everything you did, from cooking to crafting to just surviving, costs one thing or another. It's designed to create a constant sense of scarcity, and unless you really know what you're doing, it will often feel like you're just one bad day away from losing it all. But don't worry, there are ways and means to make sure your people are warm and fed. You can scavenge the things people left behind, if they aren't using it. Well, we can put it to good use. However, things in a location don't respawn, forcing us to go to different places once one has been exhausted. As I'm sure you've already figured out, some of those locations won't exactly be places people have left behind. A rather infamous location is this quiet little residential house where an elderly couple is just trying to survive. Same as you. You can turn around and leave, but you're only able to scavenge once a night, and well, you're already here and you're potentially in dire need yourself. Much like you, this couple was just one bad day away from losing it all, only in this case, you were the reason why. This scenario I find quite interesting. You see, though many of us were given the choice to rob the couple or not, It wasn't really the same choice for all of us. Some of the people playing no doubt had experience with these sorts of games. Some perhaps got lucky, while others maybe not so lucky. The point, though, is your own level of desperation for resources likely played a major deciding factor in whether or not you stole from the couple. There are those who perhaps had the luxury of a moral high ground, yet maybe in your playthrough that might not be true. If you're anything like me, you felt awful about having to do this, but if so, that's a good thing. These entities are just pixels on a screen. Their plight shouldn't matter since the second we leave the scene, they stop existing. But even still, so many people felt pangs of guilt or discomfort at clubbing a defenseless old man to death. Though I feel perhaps part of why we feel so bad has nothing to do with causing any real harm, but everything to do with us getting a moment of mental clarity about ourselves. We confronted, perhaps just for a moment, a much darker side of who we are. As I think back on some of my favorite games, I often found myself resonating with and picking the morally good options in games. Sure, I would sometimes go on a killing spree in GTA or Red Dead, but those moments never had the same weight to me. They weren't a reflection of my true morality like other moments were. I wasn't necessarily drawn to heinous acts, they weren't even all that memorable to me looking back. Some of my favorite moments narratively have been ones where I acted heroically, or at the very least where I wasn't evil. I find that's largely true of most people. From all the playthroughs I've watched, all the friends I've talked to, and all the posts I've seen online, it always felt to me like people opted for good playthroughs far more often than evil ones. Apparently, this observation of mine did have some merit behind it, as Megan Starks, who works as senior narrative designer at Obsidian Entertainment, the same studio that brought us the much acclaimed Fallout New Vegas, said that about 97% of players prefer to align with the good path over an evil one. This makes some degree of sense. But something about this statement didn't quite answer the question in its entirety. You see, while it's true that in narrative games like the ones Obsidian publishes, we pick primarily good factions, good outcomes, etc., yet those same exact players, myself included, make the choice to go on in-game rampages. Millions of players have gone through the very famous Airport Massacre in Call of Duty Modern Warfare 2. So in researching and writing the script for this, I wondered why that was the case. Why was it that we had so much trouble picking a mean dialogue option in one game, but be perfectly okay with this? I can already hear those of you watching screaming at me saying, well, of course, it's just a game, nobody actually died. This is a response I hear often, and on the surface it makes sense. We're okay with doing heinous things like this because none of it is real. That doesn't answer the question of why in a narrative or role-playing game we almost always opt to be virtuous and struggle to be cruel. I believe the answer to all these questions lies in our ability to flexibly alter our moral engagement level. Albert Bandura, a prominent psychologist, coined the term moral disengagement and applied its principles to explain why human beings engage in harmful and unethical behaviors. The basic concept is that people, in an effort to protect themselves and their own egos, use various cognitive strategies to rationalize and put distance between their unethical actions and their own sense of morality. It goes without saying that most of us believe ourselves to be good. Our own moral compass often points us in the right direction, yet sometimes we behave in ways that contradict this, and rather than walking away believing we are bad people, we instead go through complex processes of justification, minimizations, and even in some cases dehumanization to tell ourselves our righteousness is still intact. Of course, there is nothing actually morally wrong with going on virtual rampages or stealing in a video game. It's easy for us to dehumanize NPCs because they were never human to begin with, making it trivial for us to kill who we please before getting up and kissing our wife and kids goodnight. It's incidentally the same process that, according to Bandura, enables us as good people to occasionally do things that an outside observer would feel is morally reprehensible. Yet, it's understandably harder to morally disengage when the subject of our unethical behavior is real versus the many simulated people we murder every single day after work. Given this, I feel the answer is a bit nuanced and will vary somewhat from person to person. I believe when we do the right thing in games, when we feed a dog, help a child, return stolen goods, this is exactly where and when we are morally engaged. We instead humanize, at least to some extent, the characters we interact with. Our good-natured dialogue and moral choices we tell ourselves is indeed a reflection of our own character. We believe that it's the right thing to do in life, and in that respect we emulate our beliefs, even if the subject is virtual, because in those moments when we're given the choice, we do more than simply pick the good option. We make the choice to humanize something that didn't even quite have the same level of humanity that the rest of us have. In a sense, I actually find that quite beautiful. That even though nobody's watching, nobody cares, no lives are truly at stake, yet given all that, it still feels right to be the good guy. Alright, well, all that survival stuff from earlier has really depressed me, so how about we play something more fast-paced and less helpless? Good old Call of Duty. It's a high-octane action movie, only we get to play it. I'm sure I don't need to tell anyone here what Call of Duty is, but some of you may not be terribly familiar with Modern Warfare 2 in particular. We play a variety of characters, but I want to focus on the first one we play because he'll be the most relevant to our example. He's a soldier, and not just any soldier, because we control him. He's a real super soldier, which garners the attention of General Shepard, who in turn has us join an elite, top-secret branch of the CIA. We're tasked with getting close to Makarov, a Russian terrorist of the highest caliber. To facilitate our mission, we've gone deep undercover as a member of his organization. This deep cover assignment as a terrorist has us rather unsurprisingly commit acts of terrorism. We're thrust immediately into one such act alongside the big man Makarov himself. Now this scene is rather infamous and is a perfect example, I feel, of the player committing a morally reprehensible act while simultaneously not feeling all that bad about it. Perhaps they feel they have no choice as they must maintain their cover, though it's actually possible to do this entire section without shooting a single civilian. Though it doesn't really matter because if you won't shoot them, one of the other terrorists will, so perhaps if you're a utilitarian, you shoot them regardless as they'll be dead anyway and it serves to keep your cover and therefore life intact. So, this War of Mine and Call of Duty can see players do some rather naughty things, though perhaps only anecdotally I get the impression that players felt considerably worse if they stole from the elderly couple or something similar versus the airport massacre. This is purely speculation on my part, and for those of you that have done both, I'd like to hear your thoughts in the comments about what felt worse for you and why. However, since I can't retroactively change the script and re-record it after I've gotten your feedback, nor do I have access to a comprehensive dataset, I'll have to proceed with the perspective that this War of Mine had players feeling more guilty than Call of Duty. The difference on the surface stems in part, I feel, from choice and agency. We're never forced against our will into a mission called Rob the Innocent Old People. Our circumstances up to that point may be bad, sure, but it's entirely possible to go the entire game without ever harming an innocent, if we play our cards right. That's why we feel so guilty and why that entire situation feels so bad, because we know that had we just done better, tried harder, or something else, we wouldn't have had to resort to this. We blame our own inability to find and work towards a better solution, which led us to rather unfortunately do something that goes against our principles. Call of Duty never gives us that same choice. We can't argue with Shepard about the nature of our mission, we can't turn our gun on Makarov and still progress the campaign, so we're begrudgingly forced into doing what the game wants us to do, which doesn't really have the same impact. We're much more easily able to distance ourselves from that scenario once we recognize that the situation is linear, and we never had a choice, even if we might still feel somewhat bad witnessing all of this by proxy. So what then? Do we approve of mass murder but draw the line at robbing the elderly? Well, as I mentioned earlier, moral engagement levels play a key role in all of this. It wouldn't make sense to say that someone going through the airport massacre mission approves of such things in real life, though I feel I could say that someone who opts not to rob the elderly couple in this War of Mine does so because it's something they earnestly believe is the right thing to do in real life, though the same cannot be said in reverse. Coming into this essay, I had a number of ideas regarding what games can teach us, not just about morality in general, but what they can teach us about our own morality. I'm not here to tell you inherently what you should or shouldn't believe, that's not my intention. Rather, I wanted to express to all of you the idea that games themselves can serve as a powerful tool in developing our moral code. To some, this may seem a silly notion. Yet when I think about my own life and the life of people close to me, we seldom get a chance to truly put what we believe into practice. This isn't inherently a problem on its own. It's just there is little chance for us to save lives on our way to the store. We don't come into possession of stolen goods to return while at work, and it's quite unlikely we will ever be in a position where we're asked to decide who should get an important life-saving medicine. To some extent, it's nice that for many of us, we're not put in those sorts of positions. It would no doubt be stressful, and I'm sure it would keep quite a lot of us awake if we had to grapple with the consequences of major life-altering decisions. Though this is where I feel gaming can lend us a helping hand. Games can absolutely challenge our sense of right and wrong. They can present complex moral dilemma in an interactive form. It's one thing for us to read about heroic or villainous behavior. We can spend as long as we want pondering whether certain historical figures were righteous or if a character in a movie did the right thing. Games can and do place those sorts of choices squarely on your shoulders. And while yes, I'm aware it's virtual, it doesn't have the same gravity. Though earlier when I brought up the fact that most players choose the righteous path, I felt and still feel that it's for a good reason. When presented with a moral conundrum in a game, we tend to weigh each side of the debate not necessarily as our characters, though I'm sure there are plenty of role players out there, we tend to weigh it as human beings. We apply to those scenarios beliefs that tend to look shockingly similar to our own real-life beliefs, though the extent to which we do so can vary largely not just between people, but also situations. We can, when morally disengaged, partake in slaughter, which isn't reflective of our morality, and then several minutes later, we get a scenario where we do, in fact, feel morally engaged. Next, we get to discuss an absolutely legendary cult classic post-apocalyptic RPG, the beloved Fallout New Vegas. However, much as I'd love to gush over various stellar aspects of the game, we're here to discuss morality, so that's what we'll be focusing on. Now, with the other games I've covered, the extent to which you're able to influence the story has been variable. Call of Duty gives you no say, and this War of Mine affords you more choice. New Vegas, on the other hand, gives you the widest range of player choice, not just among the games I've discussed, but also among many other games in general. We can also choose how much radiation and chems our mom was exposed to when she was pregnant with us to get this face. The game opens up with us getting shot in the head and left for dead by some sketchy, smooth-talking dude. It happens, I guess. We're going to want to find and have a little chat with him about his rather unfavorable treatment of others. Fortunately, thanks to the kindness of the good people of Goodsprings, the head wound proves to be only mildly inconvenient. Doc Mitchell, the local doctor, patches us up and gives us a few things to help us, including a Pip-Boy, all at absolutely no charge. The people of Goodsprings have also treated us with an excess of kindness, telling us about valuable looting locations, providing us with a rifle, and even teaching us how to shoot it. Most players, I think, felt rather positive towards this quaint little town, so when a band of outlaws threatened the local inhabitants, the choice to side with them only felt natural. Here's the thing, though. I said New Vegas was a game of choice, and I meant it. We can choose to side with the outlaws, bringing the town under the control of this one sketchy dude. We can also obviously side with the town, but it doesn't stop there. We can also side with the town against the bandits, and then just massacre every single inhabitant afterwards anyway. We can rob Doc Mitchell the moment we wake up, and kill both him and every other resident of Goodsprings, without ever needing to start some quest or even have much of a reason to do so. The rest of this game is exactly like this. We aren't ever railroaded into picking any faction. We're free to do anything from helping, to ignoring, to working against, or outright killing pretty much anyone we want. The only exception is children, which is quite fortunate for this little annoying guy. Where perhaps in other games we had serious restrictions about what sides we could take or who we were allowed to kill, the open-ended nature of this one allows us to truly make a broad range of moral choices. There are plenty of factions for us to interact with. The New California Republic, a bureaucratic and democratic nation that seeks to rebuild the wasteland into something resembling the pre-war United States, with both the advantages and flaws that came with it. Caesar's Legion, a nation modeled after the Roman Empire, ruled with an iron fist by a man named Caesar, a nation of strong warriors enforcing a strict hierarchy, practicing slavery, and unleashing wanton brutality against their foes. New Vegas, a city of vice and sin, but one unlike anything else in the wasteland, largely untouched by war, with the enigmatic and venerable pre-war businessman Robert House at the helm. Each of these factions and more can be interacted with. You can align yourself with any of them, perhaps even working a bit with each of them, or if you dislike them, you can just kill them off as well. This level of choice and open-endedness is exactly why I wanted to talk about New Vegas. Because of how much freedom this game affords us, we're free to exercise our morality in a far broader way than with most other games. Yet if you recall my quote from earlier, a senior narrative designer from the studio that made the game said that about 97% of players opted to play the good guy. This seems to be a common consensus among players that working with the faction that routinely crucifies, burns alive, and enslaves innocent people is not something they want to do. Yet you're absolutely free to do so and have plenty of opportunities to do quests for the Legion at many points in the game. New Vegas serves as a moral sandbox for us to play around and explore our own sense of right and wrong. Earlier I spoke about that concept, the idea that our own life doesn't usually put us in positions where we have to make moral choices with potentially massive implications for others. Furthermore, even if we were for some reason confronted with a decision like that, we'd have real-world consequences to contend with, forcing us to weigh factors outside of our belief in deciding an outcome. With games like New Vegas, we're allowed to freely explore with no real consequences and with absolute privacy many morally dubious behaviors. When we can rob and kill practically any entity on the map where nobody can stop us, it's interesting that so many people playing couldn't really bring themselves to be crucifying enslavers. I've tried a few playthroughs where I told myself I would side with the Legion, but I always go against that because in the moment it just feels too bad. Deciding on who to side with or what outcome we want for a quest involves far more than simply picking blindly. We often make choices that we ourselves would make, and even in situations where we don't, the various scenarios games like New Vegas throw our way is what enables us to come to grips with our own moral code. Even if we choose to pick a path we feel is dubious, the fact that we're experiencing negative emotions still serves to clue us into what we believe to be morally correct. The same is true in cases where we make choices that feel righteous and good to us. We're rewarded with a range of positive emotions. When we play in congruence with our own beliefs, it's not so much that the game rewards us. We, in a sense, reward ourselves. There's a path that our psyche wants us to walk. Remember, most people believe themselves to be good and righteous. Our methodology might differ, but that path we tread is usually one that punishes the wicked and assists the vulnerable. For some, it's not really a path we can walk in our real life. In most ways, but that's the core principle behind games as moral playgrounds. These choices are reinforced by our reactions to them. By allowing our emotions to take the wheel, we allow our moral compass to become just that. A compass pointing us towards our beliefs and away from that which we don't. It's difficult to say whether these experiences merely mirror our internal beliefs or if there is some element of learning and synthesis, but perhaps it's both. Regardless, I'd love to hear your thoughts on it in the comments below. Part of my apprehension about discussing this topic overall is that it doesn't seem like there's a clear-cut answer about the ways in which games can influence us. I'm sure part of that is at least because, in spite of what many people think, games as a form of media mold themselves around the person playing to the extent that the developers allow it. We can play drastically different playthroughs from others because we opted to take a different side on a quest or even kill entire towns that happen to piss us off. No other book, movie, or show can claim to adapt in such a way around what it is we want to see happen. When we read about something or watch something, the event, for better or for worse, has already happened. And it happened in exactly the same way for everyone who interacted with it. We may have our own thoughts as to what we feel was right or wrong, but traditional media doesn't engage us the same way. It doesn't force us to choose. But that's also exactly why, in my opinion, games can serve as playgrounds for our beliefs. They don't tell you what happened, they demand you choose. They present you with complex dilemmas, often without telling you what the consequences of those actions will ultimately be. It's meaningful because it's not really about what happens in the game, but rather what happens within ourselves. These choices, good and bad, are just ways for us to interact with our own moral framework. They are tools that enable exploration about some of the most intimate parts of who we are. We do more than simply ask ourselves what we do in a given situation. We're presented with a virtual scenario that asks that of us directly. Alright, now that we've taken some time to talk about the bad we do in games, why don't we instead turn our attention towards the lighter side of the moral spectrum? To do this, let's discuss The Walking Dead. No, not the show or the comics, but the Telltale game. Zombie apocalypses are so ubiquitous that I won't bother explaining the world to you, but I do wish to discuss our protagonist and his journey somewhat. In the game, you play as Lee Everett, a man who was found guilty of murdering a state senator that slept with his wife. So right away, it's clear that our protagonist isn't exactly a goody two-shoes. You're on the way to prison where you have plenty of time to think about whether what you did was justified or not, but as it just so happens, it's your lucky or unlucky day depending on your perspective. You hit a zombie on the drive over which, for better or for worse, releases you into a world that has just recently been exposed to the titular Walking Dead. Early on in your travels, you meet an 8-year-old girl named Clementine, whose parents are nowhere to be seen, prompting your character to become her guardian and protector. Given that leaving a small defenseless child to be eaten alive felt somewhat morally dubious, over the course of the game she'll be at your side, and how you speak to her and what you teach her will influence not just how she sees you, but also aspects of her personality. An innocuous example would be referring to manure as shit, which would see her calling it shit in later chapters, though larger changes are also possible. The world is a dangerous place filled with both ravenous undead and depraved people, so as we play we'll do our best to shield her from threats and keep her spirits up in a world determined to crush them. With context established, the importance of this game for our conversation is that it sits in stark contrast, an opposite to some of our previous examples. Playing through this game again for footage, I remembered how good it actually was, but more importantly, I saw once again how meaningful acts of kindness could actually be. This didn't just extend to us being kind only to Clem, but to the other members of our group of survivors as well. It actively felt good to do the right thing by each of them, to feed them, to foster kindness, to support them. With Clem in particular, shielding her from harm and acting as her protector would elicit warmth in me as well. Even if you're someone who might not be as keen about kids, you're still far more likely to be kind and patient with this little girl because you believe it's the right thing to do. Most people, I imagine, would have a hard time saying or doing something mean to this defenseless little 8-year-old girl who relies on us for her protection. She is virtual though, not real outside of being some pixels on a screen, but just imagine a dialogue option where we tell her she's a burden, and she should just fuck off. Again, even though it's fake, imagine the look of sorrow in her eyes and the resignation in her voice as she hears her would-be protector turn on her. Now, I will point out, I'm sure some of you may already know, for the story to make sense, it's not really possible for Lee and Clem to have a truly bad relationship. However, you can be mean or short with her at times, and this is where I believe most players chose not to be. I once again don't know this for a fact, but I truly believe that almost everyone who played this game made the choice to be good to her when they could. Now, I'm sure you're all thinking that it's all well and good that someone does good in a game, but is this truly reflective of what they do in real life? Well, the answer is somewhat complicated, and studies have been done on human behavior, and as it turns out, we're rather poor at predicting what we do in any given situation. We strive to be fair and just, but various factors can play a big part in pushing us towards a different direction. Being hungry, feeling stressed, not getting enough sleep, peer and societal pressure, hell, we could even discuss priming and the influence of authority figures. The Milgram experiments in 1963 had people electrocute unseen fake participants, sometimes even to what they thought was death, simply because an authority figure insisted. The Good Samaritan study of 1973 saw seminary students who were supposed to give a speech on the importance of good deeds ignore someone in distress when they were in a hurry for their talk. Even seemingly good people can initially act morally and then engage in immoral behavior later because they felt they've earned it in something known as the moral self-licensing phenomenon. This body of research was done at least by some to demonstrate how seemingly normal, kind-hearted people could sometimes commit atrocities. We're all far more malleable in our morality and actions than any of us realize, no matter how resolute we actually feel about them. So, where does this leave us exactly? Does it mean that what we believe has absolutely no meaning? If any of us can simply renege on our most treasured principles with the right bit of persuasion or a change of circumstances, does what we believe in even matter? I think much like most things in life, the answer isn't clear-cut, but that's acceptable. We are each probably not as good as we believe ourselves to be, nor do our values stand immovable in the face of opposition. Even still, those of us who believe firmly in being charitable are still far more likely to act in such a manner, even if we may sometimes stray from those principles. We're not perfect, and I think that's the point of all of this. There isn't always a clear answer because we're not always consistent, but that's no cause for despair either. If we have a natural inclination for good, we likely also have a general proclivity towards acting on it as well. Many of us can feel comfortable here, but equally so choose to do this. So if you've done similar, ask yourself, which of these two things is more a reflection of what you believe? What acts best represent you? And perhaps most importantly, why is one you and the other not? Perhaps it's overly idealistic of me to think so, but I choose to believe that games like The Walking Dead and New Vegas are exactly the sorts of experiences that can teach us about our own morality. They can help us refine who we are as people, and allow us to learn not what it means to be right or wrong, but rather what we believe in. They act as mirrors into our own morality and enable self-reflection, getting us to ask difficult questions about ourselves. Would we really steal from the elderly to survive? As I said earlier, we seldom get a chance to act morally in the real world, but with this experience, we had a chance to try our hand at kindness and generosity. We in our journey through the games we play get a chance to wear many hats, ones of brutal killers, mass murderers, but also kind-hearted, generous, and compassionate heroes. It's obviously not limited to just the games I spoke about, but quite a number of them. Plenty of these experiences will have us walking away feeling entertained perhaps, but seemingly no different than when we started. The influences, if any, are ones that I feel people might not even be consciously aware of. Perhaps part of that stems from the fact that games themselves aren't telling us how to think or feel, rather they serve as windows into our own psyche. We see who we are when we are confronted by both the good and the bad. So ultimately, do we choose perhaps to see vulnerable characters with compassion, love, kindness? Or do we instead choose to see real people as nothing more than monsters from doom? If you've made it all the way to the end, you have my sincere gratitude. I am so thankful to each of you who watch, comment, and just, take part in the journey with me, I suppose. I've not made a lot of these video essays before. I'd love to make more. In order to do that, though, I kind of need your guys' input. If you have any cool ideas for video essays, but more importantly also, I'd love to hear what you think was effective and what you think wasn't. I feel like I've learned a lot from the first video. Maybe, probably, I don't know, maybe this video sucks. But even still, I took a lot of what you guys said into consideration from the first one, so I'd like to do that for future videos as well. In a way, I think a lot of you guys are part of the journey with me, so again, thank you. Please leave some comments, even if you didn't necessarily like this video, let me know why. Anywho, I think I've rambled enough. Take care and see you next time.